between the eyes. You're paralyzed, 'cause it's a thriller night, and no one's gonna save you from the beast about to strike. You know it's thriller night. You're fighting for your life inside a killer thriller tonight. Hear the doors slam, realize there's no way left to run. You feel the cold air, wonder if you'll ever see the sun. You close your eyes and hope that this is just imagination. But all the while, you hear that creature creeping up behind. You're out of time, 'cause it's a thriller night. There ain't no second chance. See the scene before the eyes, girl. Thriller night. You're fighting for your life inside a killer thriller tonight. Night creatures fall as the dead start to walk in their masquerade. There's no escaping the jaws of the alien inside. This is the end of your life. Woo! They're out to get you. The demons closing in on every side. They will possess you unless you change your number on the dial. Now is the time for you and I to cuddle close together. All through the night, I'll save you from the terror and the scream. I'll make you see that this is thriller night. 'Cause I can thrill you more than any good ever tried. Thriller night. So let me hold you tight and share a killer tonight. 'Cause it's a thriller night. 'Cause I can thrill you, girl, than any good ever tried. Thriller night. So let me hold you tight and share a killer thriller. Ow!
Well, good morning. Good morning.
Welcome. My name is Donnie Carbone, and I'm one of the pastors here. How you doing? Put me on Facebook. All right. Welcome all those of you who are joining us live online. Welcome, you guys. Let's give them a round of applause for joining us. I'm so glad you guys are here. Pastor Eric, I'm glad we were able to catch you online as well. That was awesome. For those of you who are watching, was that pretty cool? Listening to Thriller? That was just like Dan and the whole band. Thank you guys for doing that. That was really sweet. We'll talk more about Thriller in a minute here. We are in week 4 of Creature Feature. And just as Pastor Graham said, we are talking about those things from within, that sort of murk that come out of nowhere, sort of like the video of Thriller. It just all of a sudden something turns and people become something that they're not. And I tend to think of this, that we all have that struggle sometimes. This week's theme is Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Now, who's familiar with the story of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde? Very good. Okay, in a nutshell, it's a story about a doctor who tries to use some science to chemically or radically change and separate the good and bad of a person, and trying to boost the good while eliminating the bad. It's just a story of that dichotomy. But what happens as a side effect is he's really smart for the doctor, but he becomes very violent and destructive as Mr. Hyde, and then the whole tension of who's who. And I sort of can relate to that because there's times in my life where I am the pastor, Donnie, you know, the charming, the intellectual, the smart one. And then all of a sudden, my wife, or theoretically someone in my life, would say something, and my Hyde starts showing. You know what I'm saying? How many of you guys ever had your Hyde show in the wrong moments at the wrong time? There was a moment I remember, and this is like one of those things that are time-stamped in my life. I was a teenager, just barely into driving. I was driving down Lake Worth Highway down in West Palm Beach, and I remember pulling over to get a gas station when gas was $1.25. Remember those good old days? Yeah, that shows how old I am. But down in West Palm Beach, I pulled into a gas station, and I'm waiting in line. You know how you try to queue up, and you're like, all right, my gas thing's on this side of the car, so I got to get on this side, but it's all blocked, so I'm waiting for a car to pull out. And I'm sitting there in this mid-90s Chevy Cavalier. At the time, it was new-ish and nice, and I was like, all right, teenager driving in a nice red Cavalier. It's like, woo! Sitting here, all of a sudden, I see a spot open, and it's the one I've been waiting for. And I'm about to pull into it, and all of a sudden, this big Lincoln Town car comes just driving in there with a driver that you could barely see the knuckles in the hair, like a Mr. Magoo driving, and just oblivious to every round, just pulls right into that spot. And in a moment of frustration, this young, meek student who was proclaimed, I was a Christian at that time, but yet something rose up in me, and I said something. Thankfully, my windows were closed that they didn't hear. I said something nasty, and I hate this, but I'm going to say it. This may surprise you. I said, I hope you get cancer and die. I know, that's a bad look, isn't it? I was like, I surprised myself. But it gets worse. Because after I said that and hearing the echo off the windshield, I turned to my right, and there was a date that we were about to go to a movie on. I had totally forgotten in that moment. So she said, how could you say such a thing? Now, the reason that stands out is, now I remember who she was, but I don't remember where we went to eat, what we watched that movie. I don't remember much of that evening. But I remember that moment just like, oh my goodness, something just slipped through the filter. Like Pastor Eric was talking on week one, it's not that we have a filtering problem, it's that we have a heart problem. And that made me had to think, what is on the inside? What in my life showed something on the inside I had to do some thinking about? And that's pretty deep for a teenager, but that still sticks in my mind. Now, how many of you guys had similar moments where it stamps in your brain like, I can't bring those back, you know? Fortunately, the people drove off innocently, and we went on and had our evening, but it reminded me why Thriller stands out to me, where you can be totally doing something, all of a sudden a creature comes out. It's also why I identify with the Incredible Hulk, not because of my outstanding physique, but the Dr. Banner, how he turns into the Hulk when he gets mad and angry. I remember being so angry as a teenager that my first experience of patching drywall was probably repetitive during the 14 to 16, 17 years where we're punching holes. Anyone punch holes in drywall? Oh, yeah. Anyone found the stud? That's not so fun, you know. And so I remember foot marks, shoe marks, everything just getting mad and taking out on the wall. So the Incredible Hulk rang true to me. So I understand the Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde. And so when we were talking about speaking this week, I was like, that's mine. I can relate to that. But we all hide or try to hide that Hyde side of our life, right? It's not something we really are proud of. We can talk about it in hindsight and laugh at it, but it's still one of those things that we're like, I hope you don't judge me based on that 2% moment of my life. We hide it from our Facebook. I know a lot of times that we post stuff of our best life on Facebook, like, hey, this is me in Wyoming with a fish, hypothetically saying someone would post something like that. Or you would hide from your family. You know, I tried to do my best to not let my mom see the Hyde side of me as a teenager, because if my mom cried, I was like, oh, that's the kryptonite. That would just devastate me. We try to hide it from our work. We don't want them to see us because we want them to think of us in a good manner, especially if you're a ministry or a pastor. We hide it from our kids. It's interesting how we try to filter these things, but isn't it interesting that how we are on the outside tends to be versus how we are on the inside at times? And what I mean by the outside, it's how we project ourselves to people. On the inside, it's how we see ourselves or how we know who we are when we're by ourselves or when we look in the mirror and we're like, who am I really? When you wake up in the morning or when you go to bed at night, you're with you. And you have to make those thoughts. Did I live the day I really wanted to live the way I wanted to? But now we're like, that wasn't really me then. Now, we have learned to filter ourselves. I use these examples. I'm being a former youth pastor, I like props. I'm visual. I fall asleep in services that don't have visuals or humor. So we have filters. Like, it's amazing how we can behave with one group of people, then we're at home, then with a different group of people. And it's how we filter, like how I hang around people at sports can be different than how I hang around people, say, at work. Or the opposite is true. When people find out I'm a pastor, they go from talking like Pastor Graham, then they start talking really like, glorious brother, we're going to have a great church today. They become all Baptist on me. I'm like, dude, you were just telling me mama jokes, and now you're going to get all pious. And I was like, no, that doesn't work. But the tension is, what happens when my friends from work meet people at home? Oh, man. Or how about this? When you're deployed, and you come back and you meet your church group, and those two people meet. It's like you almost have to pre-warn your group, like you go to your family, it's like, hey, just to let you know, my friends, that they think my name is Paul, and don't be thrown off by my British accent. All right, here we go. And so we filter, we try to hedge our bets, and we try to do our best to live in this blurred chaos that's sort of out of focus. Like wherever we go, we sort of morph into that. And then what happens is those situations when that creature comes out, it shocks those people, but it doesn't shock us because we know that down inside that anger is there, those words are there, that destructive nature is there. But what happens if that world of reality crashes, our Hyde comes out pretty destructively. Sometimes we filtered, our personality is based on that situation, like my identity is based on my job. And we lose our job, and all of a sudden, the Hyde comes out. In fact, I've known some loved ones. I used to have a stepfather. He was a nice guy, fairly well off, fairly healthy, got injured at work. And from that point on, after losing his job because of health reasons, he became someone totally different. It's like his identity changed. So how can we be who we really are consistently across all platforms of our lives without having these Hyde moments or having our circumstances dictate to us, almost script us from one character to another character? And if we call ourselves Christ followers, I know that's a challenge. How can we be consistent in these different venues when our circles overlap? Now, I know it's sort of funny when this happens, but I was sort of talking with my staff today, our staff today, like my staff. All you guys are my staff. We're talking about how people on Facebook sometimes have different personality, like different Facebook pages or social media pages, and they have different personalities. Like, who are these two people? And then they had those really stupid personality tests on Facebook. If you were a tree, what type of tree would you be? If you take this test, what type of dog would you be? And I caught my team filling out the Disney princess test. And I had one of my camera guys take a picture of this, so watch this.
Seriously? Every time.
Every time.
We run up where they stay all day in the sun.
The funny thing is, he can really sing too. But it's funny how we take these things and we laugh and joke, but sometimes that's sort of true depending on who we're with. Our personality sort of changes because we try to fit those circumstances. And it's not a bad thing that we talk sports with sports people and we talk church with church people, but it's the dangerous thing comes when our identity shifts so much that we lose who we are, we become this other or dependent upon those circumstances. put our identity in the market, and also the market crashes, and then all of a sudden all we have is that Hyde moment. And so if you're watching this online and you're thinking, wow, this might be a tough message because I'm going through some stuff right now that is shaking up my world, you're in the right spot. Because at the beginning of every day, beginning and end of every day, we have to, again, look in the mirror and say, who am I? Who am I going to be today? How am I going to make a difference today? And I can understand for those of you who are watching online who will call yourselves Christ followers, this might be a tension you're currently challenged with, that if you were totally honest, that who you are in church may be different than who you are at home. I often I read that meme, I want to be the person my dog thinks I am. Not always the person how my family describes I am, even though my family loves me, but it's a tension that we manage. And I can also identify with those who may not see Christ as the center of their life, people who are just checking out church. They're like, well, what does this have to do with me? Well, today is going to actually be a great talk for those, whether you're a Christ follower or someone who is loosely checking out God. There's some stuff in here that help you get focused in your life. You're going to have some benefits. We've said this a lot at Shoreline. Following Jesus will make you better at life and also make your life better. But there will be a second part of my conversation today in our talk that will be the reason why having your faith in Christ gives you an inside track to doing something even deeper, something more profound. So you're going to have a benefit either way, so I hope you guys check in with us. You're going to like this. And for those of you guys with a church filter, they're thinking, I'm still trying to figure out why they played Thriller in their church. Are they allowed to do that? Well, we're trying to change your perception on what church is like. And so hopefully by the end of today, you too will expand and appreciate and laugh with us and enjoy with us. Now, one of the most famous people in the Bible that had those Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde types of moments is one of my favorite apostles I like to bring back because I relate to that. The guy's name is Peter. You guys have heard of Peter. He's got a lot written about him. If he wasn't today and had social media, he'd be one of those guys like me who would be like me and also me. Like he does something, and then just a minute or two later, he does something totally contradictory, and also me. And for example, if he was, let's use the first one here. This is Peter, if he had a social media page. Right after Jesus told him, upon this rock I will build my church, he's like praising, because Peter just made a big declaration saying that you are the Messiah, all this, and without prompting of who Jesus was. And we look at it just a few verses later, give it like 3 minutes. Jesus then turns to him and says, get thee behind me, Satan. I went King James on you for there with a V in there. That's the old school coming out. It's the monster from within. But you see, all of a sudden that was also him. Then we see the next scene, another one of his posts. Jesus is going around washing the disciples' feet, and he gets all pious, and he's like, takes a hard take. You shall never wash my feet. And one verse later, pretty much the difference was like, Jesus says, if you don't let me wash your feet, I'll have nothing to do with you. Then he's like, never mind, not just my feet, but my hands, my everything, I want you to take everything. Again, me, also me. And then the third one, I love this one. I'm ready to go with you to prison and to death. And this is one of the more famous ones where he's saying all these things in front of all his homeboys and Jesus. And he's like, I'm your ride or die. And then all of a sudden, just hours later, we find him not denying once, but 3 times about, I don't even know this man. And I relate to that because there's some times in my life where I feel like Peter in those moments, the me, also me. Everyone ever been there where you say one thing and the next, an hour later, you're like, ooh, that's exactly what I told my kid not to do, and now I just did. But I love the fact of this story about Peter is that Jesus went out of his way. After all this, he comes back, and he chooses to chase after Peter. Now, it's a whole other message, but I do want to reiterate this. Peter had his worldview of who he was and who he thought he was crash. It just collapsed. His thought of who Jesus was, because he was thinking Jesus would be this Messiah, would politically change the landscape, or even in a military form would change the landscape, but Jesus had different ideas, and that identity crumbled and crashed. So Peter went with all he knew left was, I'm going to go back fishing because that's what I know. Because his identity wasn't really solidified in something true. It was still in development. So he went back out fishing. So Jesus went out and chased him. Camera, follow me. He would chase them out fishing. And he found this guy, and it said, started talking with Peter, and no one else was around, and he started talking about these really close things, just like I am to you. Now this guy was fishing, so Jesus knew that this heart was in fishing, so he did one of those miracles, like way in the beginning, how he hooked Peter, and he did it again, just to get Peter's attention, saying, this is me and you. And then when Peter, you could tell Peter was still like, there's an obvious elephant in the room, but Jesus said, do you love me? And Peter says, yes. Then feed my people. Love my sheep. He did it 3 times, and that was like zeroing the debt in Peter's mind. Jesus had nothing against Peter, but Peter's perception of Peter and Peter's perception of God, Peter's perception of who Jesus was, changed then. Because there we find at that moment that Peter no longer was the me, also me. From that point on, he's like, I got it. I now see how you see me, and that changed the way I see me. That changed everything. We find his story later on in Acts, and for those of you who want to find out what happens, that story about I'm your ride or die, I'll go to prison with you, you should see what happens, how his life miraculously was transformed and different. That's another message, another story. I love the fact that Jesus went out of his way and rebuilt him, refocused him, and got him realigned to what he needed to be. So all those various perceptions who Peter thought he was got singular. And so that way he was able to do a singular mission. Because Jesus knew this, and he said this a lot. In fact, in Mark 3, it said, a house divided against itself cannot stand. You can't inwardly live with this turmoil. In fact, he said in Matthew 6, you cannot serve 2 masters. You either hate the one and love the other, or be devoted to one and despise the other. It's like listening to Auburn and Alabama fans talk. You can't be both. Sorry. You got 2 kids, like, sorry, we're going to have to disown one of them. But seriously, when it comes to actually who we are on the inside, that is true because we have that struggle. And Jesus knows that we have this struggle. That's part of who we are. Now, Peter wasn't the only guy struggling with that Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. There's another character. He was a prominent Jew, but he was also known as a traitor to his family, a thief to his neighbors. He was a tax collector. Who do you guys think I'm talking about? Some of you guys, all right. I'm going to give you another hint. In the sea of Pastor Graham's, he was the Pastor Eric. Who do you think I'm talking about now? Zacchaeus, yes. He was a shorter guy. So those of you who said Matthew or Levi, you are also correct, because earlier in the book of Luke, Jesus goes out of his way. He found some rich people, so I'll hang out with these guys over on this side. He goes out and hangs out with some rich tax collectors. Because at that time, the people would be like, who are you hanging out with these guys? Because these guys are sinners. Sinners. Then he'd hang out with some prostitutes. Sorry, not kidding. Hold on now. And he'd go out and he'd have a conversation, have dinner and lunch, and have a feast with them. And the people would be upset because they thought he was supposed to be this Messiah who was supposed to be this, the picture we have with the lamb over the shoulder with walking with the shepherd's staff, with that perfect walk that doesn't even move, he just hovers. But in fact, he was like, I'm hanging out with these guys because he came to change people's perception of who the Messiah was because they had bad filters. But he also came to change the people, the tax collectors, the sinners. So we find Levi in the earlier books of Luke, and then we see Jesus as he's going through teaching some parables, and we're going to get into 19 in a second. But the chapter right before our main text, we see Jesus talking to his group of people, and he just got done hanging out with tax collectors. Now he's teaching about children. Like you got to be like a childlike faith to come to the kingdom. Again, changing people's perception. Because children were like commodities. He said, you got to have their faith. In fact, if anyone messes with these kids, it's better that they just got mob hipped. Concrete boots, bottom of the ocean. It's better that happens to you than you mess with these kids. Because he's changing the perceptions of kids, but also about their faith. In the same breath, he goes on and talks about how difficult it is for rich people, through the story of the rich young ruler who had a lot and said, what do I need to do to be saved? He says, well, what you need to do is this. And the guy says, I do all that. I'm a good person. Then he one-ups him and says, hey, well, how about this? Why don't you give your stuff away? Come follow me. And he challenged his identity, because that rich young ruler, we don't even know what his name was, but obviously his identity was tied to money, and he was unwilling to give that identity up to being Christ-centered or a God-centered worldview. And so after that story, Jesus then says it's easier for a camel to go through an eye of a needle than for a rich person. And then when the people say, well, then it's impossible, what can we do? And I love the song that we just sang about, the rattle, that if we think it's impossible, God's like, wait, watch this. Because right after, you look at chapter 18, comes chapter 19, and my math, that's correct. Right after he says, what is impossible with man is possible with God, we next find the story of Zacchaeus. We find Jesus walking through the streets, and there's a crowd following him, and all of a sudden, there's not only a tax collector, but the chief tax collector. So he's not only despised by the Jews, despised by the Romans, but other tax collectors, because he's cheating the people who are cheating the people. Yeah. So he's an elite thief. And so he's now sitting over here, and I love Jesus' example, because if anyone in the audience the Jews would thought would be impossible, it would be the chief tax collector. So Jesus straightway goes to him, and here's Zacchaeus. He just wants to see what's going on, so he's climbing up in a tree, and Jesus says, I'm going to have lunch at your place. So we see this in the scripture. I'm going to jump all the way down to the verse where it says, and all the people saw this and began to murmur. You know what happens? I love this. Have you guys been in a group that murmured? Online audience, I need you guys to be the judge of this. So I'll be Jesus, and I'm about to make the statement, but I need the rest of you guys to practice your murmur. Give me some murmur. Now, there's a microphone here that our online people can hear you. Online, AJ, let me know if they can hear the murmur. And so here's Zacchaeus. He's like, hey, here's Jesus. Zacchaeus, come on down. I want to stay at your house today. Murmur. And so he hears a murmuring. And so they go, and he actually goes. He goes and hangs out with these sinners, these tax collectors, and having a feast. Then all of a sudden, he can still hear people murmuring. And Zacchaeus hears this. He's like, that's enough murmuring. And he stands up and says this. This is whatever verse. He says to the people, look, Lord, here now I give half of my possessions to the poor. And if I have cheated anybody out of anything, I will pay 4 times that amount. Murmuring stopped. Because now it just got real. Now, I don't know if you know this, the Jewish law that they had back, that they followed from the book of Numbers, if you were to repay someone back, retribution, reconciliation, it was 1/5 was the appropriate. So it's like double tithe. It's like, someone cheats you give 20% back. But notice the change. Notice the irrational generosity. He said, half of my belongings to the poor. That's irrational. That's not even required by the law. Something in him changed at that dinner time that forever changed his perception that I want to give irrationally. And that point, that 20%, I'm going to give you 4 times to those. He wanted to make sure that no one out there had a debt outstanding. He zeroed that account and then some. And then what did Jesus say right after that was probably one of the most profound things in that chapter. He says this. Jesus said to him, today salvation has come to this house because this man too is a son of Abraham. For the Son of Man came to seek and to save the lost. Now, you've probably heard that once or twice in church, but 3 powerful perceptions got radically changed in that one phrase. Today, salvation has come to this house. Holy smokes. If you said that in that day and age, you're borderline heretic, because who are you to say salvation? You're not God. But he went ahead and said, today, salvation has come to this house because this man, pointing at Zacchaeus, is the son of Abraham. All you guys that disowned him, he just showed you that he's family. He's one of you. He's one of the people I consider my tribe. Also, another perception change, for the Son of Man has come to seek and to save the lost. Jesus changed another perception there. So let's look at this. The first perception that Jesus changed was how the people saw Zacchaeus. They saw him as a thief, a traitor, but Jesus said, no. I say this guy has not only saved, but he's one of your family. He's one of you. He is family. He is part of this family here. And people had to listen because, holy smokes, he just gave everything. He went outside the law, above and beyond. Something has radically changed in his values. The next perception is the people. Jesus now just said, hey guys, just to let you know who I am, I came to seek and to save those who were lost. That's including everyone in the room as well as Zacchaeus. But the third one is equally as powerful, is that Zacchaeus got to see how God sees him. Did you guys catch that? Because now he got to hear from Jesus himself that not only is restored to his community as being one of the family members, and he got to see how people are seeing him. Now he understands how Jesus himself sees him. That salvation has come, that he is not what people have been talking about him. It's not the labels he's been carrying his whole life. He's not what his cousins been thinking about him. It's not what the Romans have been thinking about him. It's not when he looks in the mirror and disqualifies himself because he knows what he did was wrong. And so all those labels that he put on himself, he's like, but God sees me this way. And he said, salvation has come to this house. Something has changed. I love that those three filters had been shifted. When Jesus started talking originally, he started talking about the golden rule, do unto others as you would do unto others. But I said, I gave you a new commandment. I want you to love others the way I love them. Because I think he knew that sometimes we have a hard time, not only the way we see other people, but how we see ourselves. And he says, let's take it up a notch. I want you to see how I see you. Because once you begin to see yourself the way that God sees you, you will begin to see others the way God sees them. I'll say that again. Once you begin to see yourself the way that God sees you, you can then see others the way that God sees them, the way that he sees them. I learned this is one of my most profound truths a little bit after the car incident. I was at church in the youth group, and I don't remember what the youth pastor was saying. So Pastor Caroline, I know you work with Tribe, and sometimes you have some powerful messages. But the best message, I was just an opportunity to go to the front and just pray. And I was at my end of trying to figure things out on my own. See, my parents did the divorce thing, and I've talked about this before. I'd sort of had a couple years of just enough people messing up my life. I'm going to make myself the center of my own life, and I'm going to make my own decisions. And after about a couple of years of that, God had that Dr. Phil moment. He's like, so how's that working for you? I realized if I'm the center of my worldview, when I make mistakes and I'm the only one to blame, and it just becomes a self-incriminating cycle of I just hate who I am because I'm not who I want to be. Anyone ever been there before? And then at that moment, I had just this clarity of just how Jesus would see me. And it just totally changed the scales. All the things that would disqualify, it's like, that doesn't matter. That's not how I see you. I designed you. I created you. Those things, they don't hold water in my court. And I had a breaking down moment. I was like, oh my goodness. And my perception, who I am, radically changed. Because I realized I wasn't what people had been labeling me. I wasn't who I labeled me. And that broke a filter to me how I saw other people, which then defeated that monster within me where I was so angry that said that you owed me, and you wronged me, and you wronged me, and you wronged me. I realized that if God has forgiven me from all these things, my debt was zeroed with him. God has also done that with him. And so whatever he did has no weight. I can actually be happy about him and not be angry. He doesn't owe me anything, because that's all what anger really is. It's like, you owe me, and you're hoping that they would die from the poison, but you're the one holding the poison, because that's what anger and unforgiveness does. And at that moment, when I saw myself the way that God saw me, I was able to let go of all the relationships in my heart that I'd been like, they owe me. They did me wrong. I've got these things that they've done wrong. I was like, God can forgive me, then God could forgive them. So if I'm going to be what Jesus said, is to love people the way that he loved them, wow, that changed everything. That put Christ in the center of my worldview. So no matter where I go, I'm still who I am. I don't get pulled off course by the environment I'm with, whether my job title changes, whether my stock portfolio changes, whether or not my health fails. Nothing changes because my identity is how Christ sees me. Now, for those of you who may not call yourself Christ followers or checking out church, you can totally try to live your life with you as the center of your worldview. Unfortunately, that can set up a very narcissistic frame, and you become less aware of the people around you. And when you come to that reality, that monster within comes out, and your friends and neighbors, they see it. That's not a healthy place to live, but it will focus and empower your life. I've seen people do this with their career. They get so focused on their career that they forget the family, they forget the friends. Or people get so focused in their kids or in their spouse or that boyfriend, girlfriend, that they lose all perception of who they are in God. And all of a sudden that monster from within comes out more regularly because of those vulnerabilities. I'm here to tell you guys, you can focus your life, but when you focus your life on Christ, whose principles don't change, your life is now rooted on a foundation. And the things you thought were impossible now become possible. So the secret to defeating that monster is this little formula. If Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde were here, I'd say these are things we need to work on. We need to focus on the outside by making Christ the center of our life. And then we also take moments on the inside where we find words of life. And this is where I'm going to do, and we're going to close with this as our band gets ready. As I was saying, I had this little example of stuff that I would carry in my own life, my filter of who I am. And there's things like I'm disqualified, I'm forgotten, it's too late for me now, I'm too broken. If they knew what I did, worthless. Or I still have questions, God, I don't know who you are truly, so I can't really give my heart to this Jesus I'm still trying to figure out. But then I realized it took some time, but God, in his timing, would slowly say, this one isn't true because of this. And it was through some of the things I've read in the scriptures or some things I've heard in small groups and communities. So you might be going through these questions, and you're looking, how can I peel these layers off? Well, maybe you need to get in a group with the She Shed or Man Cave Monday, and they can make your perception of hopelessness go away with the perception of who God is. I've got questions on who I am. Maybe you need to get in a small group of friends, and start to have these filters pulled away. And as God continues to pull things from your life, you get to see the real you in the mirror. The monster has no more leverage to come out in those moments. And all of a sudden you find yourself, it's been a while since Mr. Hyde has come out because he has no more equity, no more shadows in your life that he can leverage against you in the dark corners of your light. And for many people, well, it's too late. I'm old as this guy. No. Or maybe I've done too much like this guy. Or maybe I've had a history like this lady. And God says, no. What you think is impossible, I make it possible. I love that we're going to end with these questions. And we've had these questions every week. And I want you to sort of challenge and think about these questions. And you can come take this away, if you don't mind. How is my heart really doing? As you think about where you are, where's your focus? The second question is, where am I tempted to be someone I'm not? Is that in church? Is that with your in-laws? Is that at work? Just be honest. I mean, I know when I was recovering from COVID and sitting in the hospital when your body's broken and I considered myself a volleyball player and I couldn't do much, I was like, am I still me? And so when I'm sick, am I still going to be the same person, or am I going to let the monster come out? Number 3, where is Christ in the spectrum of my focus? You may be, again, processing, well, I don't know this Jesus. Well, then, how about this? Why don't you start with his teachings and his lifestyle, put that a general category, and start making that the center of your worldview, and just come and follow, check out God, keep showing up every week, and see if these lifestyle decisions and who he is makes your life better, if it's worth grounding your life in it. Number 4, is there something inside my life that is blocking? Like you have these labels. If there is, I want to encourage you guys who have never been to a life group like Catalyst or been to a community, that I'm going to I'm going to ask you guys to stand with me, and we're going to sort of tell you what God really thinks about who you are. Would you stand with me real quick? And right after this, we're going to have one more worship song for us to process. But you may be sitting here with all these labels in your life and some things you put on yourself, and I want to speak truth to you. I want to give you resources. I want to give you ammunition for when the enemy comes at you and says, you can't do this. I want to tell you what God has spoken over who you are. Here's some things that he said. And if you're a believer in here or online, feel free to repeat after me. For those of you who don't have to, but you can speak this out in faith, even if you're not there. I'll say something, and you repeat after me. I am a child of God. Now say it like it actually is who you are. I am a child of God. I am holy and blameless. I am redeemed through the blood of Jesus. I'm no longer a slave to sin. I am chosen, not forsaken. I am God's workmanship. I am fearfully and wonderfully made. I am a new creation. I am more than a conqueror. I'm an overcomer. I am free. I am loved. I'm alive. I believe all these things in Jesus' name. Amen.
He whispers in my ear, tells me that I'm feeling. He shares a melody, tells me to repeat, and it makes me whole. It reminds my soul I am all he says I am. I am all he says I am. I am all he says I am, and he says I am his own. I was blinded by the scales upon my eyes. He came like a light, burned upon the light. When he set me free, he reminded me I am all he says I am. I am all he says I am. I am all he says I am. And he says I am his own. Chains are broken, the scales are on the floor, truth is spoken, I'm no orphan anymore. Chains are broken, the scales are on the floor, truth is spoken, I'm no orphan anymore. Chains are broken, the scales are on the floor, truth is spoken, I'm no orphan anymore. I am loved, I am new. no slave to sin. I'm a saint. I am righteousness. Oh, I'm alive, I'm alive, I'm alive. Oh, I'm alive, I'm alive, I'm alive. Oh, I'm alive, I'm alive, I'm alive. I am all He says I am. I am all He says I am. I am all He says I am. And He says I am His own.